Have you ever thought about why the most dangerous people are often the most generous? Why do the greatest deceivers use truth as their weapon? Why does kindness sometimes hide the sharpest blade? This video will change how you see honesty, generosity, and trust itself. Because what I'm about to reveal goes against everything you've been taught about good and evil, about sincerity and manipulation, about the relationship between truth and power. The greatest masters of power understood something that sounds absolutely paradoxical. They understood that one sincere gesture, one act of genuine honesty, one moment of strategic generosity can accomplish what 1,000 lies cannot. They understood that people's defenses are strongest against obvious deception but weakest against apparent honesty. This is Law 12 from the 48 Laws of Power. Use selective honesty and generosity to disarm your victim. One sincere and honest move will cover over dozens of dishonest ones. Open-hearted gestures of honesty and generosity bring down the guard of even the most suspicious people. Once your selective honesty opens a hole in their armor, you can deceive and manipulate them at will. A timely gift, a Trojan horse, will serve the same purpose. Now, I can already feel your discomfort. This law sounds evil. This law sounds like a manual for sociopaths. This law seems to teach that honesty and generosity are just tools for manipulation, that kindness is a weapon, that trust is a trap. And you're right to be disturbed, because this law reveals something dark about human nature and about how power actually operates in the real world. But here's the twist that will make you even more uncomfortable. This law describes tactics that are used against you every single day, by advertisers, by politicians, by manipulative people in your life, by corporations, by anyone who wants something from you. The question is not whether these tactics exist. The question is whether you'll remain ignorant of them and continue to be their victim, or whether you'll understand them and learn to recognize when they're being used against you. Let me take you back to one of the most famous stories in all of human history, a story that gave us the very phrase we still use today. The Trojan horse. In ancient Greece, the city of Troy was under siege by Greek armies for 10 years. The walls of Troy were impregnable. Direct assault had failed repeatedly. The Trojans were confident in their defenses. They had successfully resisted everything the Greeks had thrown at them. Then one morning, the Trojans woke to find something astonishing. The Greek army was gone. The siege was over. And left behind on the beach was a magnificent gift. A massive wooden horse, intricately carved, beautiful beyond description. The Trojans debated what to do. Some suspected a trick. The priest Laocoon warned, "I fear the Greeks even when they bring gifts." But others argued that this was a peace offering, a sign of respect, an acknowledgement of Troy's strength. After all, why would the Greeks leave such a valuable gift if it contained danger? The horse was clearly an offering to the gods. To reject it would be an insult to the divine. And so, in a moment that changed history, the Trojans pulled the horse inside their walls. That night, Greek soldiers hidden inside the horse emerged, opened the gates, and Troy fell. The gift was the trap. The generosity was the weapon. The moment of trust was the moment of defeat. This story has echoed through millennia because it captures a fundamental truth about power and deception. The best way to penetrate defenses is not through obvious attack, but through apparent generosity. The best way to get someone to lower their guard is to give them something they want. The best way to win trust is through selective, strategic honesty. This is not just ancient history. This is the operating manual for how power works in the modern world. Think about how companies manipulate you right now, today, in this moment. They offer you free trials, free shipping, free content, free tools, generous return policies, honest admissions about product limitations. Why? Because they understand Law 12 perfectly. That free trial gets you to invest time learning their system, to integrate it into your workflow, to become dependent. When the trial ends, you're already hooked. The free shipping requires you to sign up for their subscription service. Once you have it, inertia keeps you subscribed even when you're not using it. The free content is designed to build trust, so when they eventually sell you something, you've already accepted them as a legitimate authority. The honest admission about one small limitation makes you trust them about everything else, lowering your guard against the bigger manipulations. Let me give you a specific modern example that perfectly illustrates Law 12. There's a sales technique called negative selling where the salesperson actually tells you reasons not to buy the product. They'll say things like, "This might not be right for you if you're looking for the cheapest option," or "I want to be honest, this is a learning curve that some people find frustrating," or "Let me tell you about some complaints we've received from customers." And you know what happens? Your defenses drop. You think, "This person is being honest with me. This person has my best interests at heart. This person isn't like other pushy salespeople." And in that moment of trust, you become far more likely to buy. The selective honesty about small negatives has made you vulnerable to the larger pitch. The apparent generosity of admitting flaws has disarmed your skepticism. This is Law 12 in action. Not ancient history. Not theoretical manipulation. Real tactics being used on you constantly. And the reason they work is because they exploit a fundamental feature of human psychology. We are wired to trust generosity. We are wired to reciprocate kindness. We are wired to lower our defenses when someone appears honest. These instincts served us well in small tribal societies where reputation mattered and long-term relationships were everything. But in the modern world, where you interact with strangers constantly, where corporations have no conscience, where reputation can be manufactured and manipulated, these instincts make you vulnerable. Now let's go deeper into the psychology of why this law works so effectively. Human beings have what psychologists call reciprocity bias. When someone does something nice for us, we feel psychologically compelled to return the favor. This is so powerful that it works even when we know we're being manipulated. Studies have shown that waiters who give diners a small piece of candy with the check receive significantly higher tips, even though the candy costs almost nothing and the diners are fully aware it's a tactic. The mere act of giving triggers a reciprocity response that we struggle to override even when we consciously recognize the manipulation. This reciprocity instinct is so strong that entire industries are built around exploiting it. Think about pharmaceutical companies that give free samples to doctors. The sample costs the company pennies. But once the doctor starts prescribing that medication, the company makes thousands of dollars. The doctor often doesn't even realize they've been influenced. They think they're making an objective medical decision. But the free sample created a subtle obligation, a sense of reciprocity, that tilted the decision in the drug company's favor. This is Law 12 operating at an industrial scale. Or think about how politicians use strategic honesty. A politician will admit to some minor flaw or past mistake in a carefully controlled way. They'll show vulnerability. They'll appear human and relatable. And voters think, finally, an honest politician. Someone who admits their mistakes. Someone I can trust. But that strategic admission of a small truth is calculated to build trust that will be exploited later. The politician who tearfully admits to a youthful indiscretion gains credibility that helps hide much larger corruptions. The one moment of apparent honesty creates a shield against scrutiny. Let's examine another historical case that demonstrates both the power and the danger of Law 12. In Renaissance Italy, there was a man named Cesare Borgia, one of the most feared and effective political operators of his time. Borgia understood that brutality alone created resistance and rebellion. So he would alternate ruthless violence with strategic acts of generosity and mercy. After conquering a territory through force, he would immediately provide generous aid to the people, he would reduce taxes, he would punish corrupt officials, he would appear as a liberator rather than a conqueror. The people, expecting continued brutality, were disarmed by these generous acts. Their resistance melted. They began to see Borgia as a legitimate ruler rather than a tyrant. And in that moment of lowered defenses, Borgia would consolidate power completely, installing systems of control that were far more extensive than what he could have achieved through force alone. Niccolò Machiavelli, who observed Borgia closely, understood what was happening. Machiavelli recognized that strategic generosity was a form of power more subtle and more effective than obvious coercion. In The Prince, Machiavelli wrote about how rulers must know when to use force and when to use generosity, when to deceive and when to be honest, understanding that these are all tools in the toolkit of power. The truly effective ruler uses each tool strategically, not randomly or purely. And the most powerful tool is often the unexpected one. Generosity when cruelty is expected. Honesty when deception is anticipated. These reversals disarm people psychologically in ways that consistent behavior never can. Now let's talk about personal relationships, because Law 12 operates here with devastating effectiveness. Think about the manipulative partner who, after a period of criticism or coldness, suddenly becomes incredibly generous and loving. They buy an expensive gift. They plan a romantic evening. They open up emotionally. And the other person thinks, see, they really do care. I was worrying over nothing. This generosity proves their love. But what's actually happening? The strategic act of generosity has reset the emotional dynamic. It has made the partner forget or minimize the previous bad behavior. It has created a sense of debt and obligation. It has lowered defenses. And after this moment of generosity, the manipulative behavior continues, often worse than before, but now the victim is less likely to leave because they remember the generous gesture and hold on to hope that the good version of their partner will return. This is a classic abuse pattern. Psychologists call it the cycle of abuse. Tension building, incident, reconciliation, calm. The reconciliation phase is where Law 12 operates. The abuser uses strategic kindness, apologies, gifts, promises to disarm the victim and prevent them from leaving. The generosity is real in the moment, but its purpose is to maintain control. This is Law 12 at its darkest and most destructive. But now I need to address something crucial. Law 12 can be used for evil, yes. But understanding Law 12 is also essential for protecting yourself from evil. If you don't understand how strategic honesty and generosity can be used to manipulate you, you'll fall for it repeatedly. You'll trust con artists. You'll believe manipulative partners. You'll be swayed by dishonest salespeople and politicians. You'll give your money, your time, your loyalty to people who are exploiting your good nature. Let me tell you about one of the most successful con artists in American history, a man named Victor Lustig. In the 1920s, Lustig pulled off an incredible scam. He convinced people that he had a machine that could duplicate money. He would show them the machine, put a genuine $100 bill inside, turn some cranks and dials, wait a few hours, and out would come two perfect $100 bills. The buyer would examine them carefully. They were real. Perfect duplicates. Amazed, people would pay Lustig tens of thousands of dollars for this miraculous machine. And here's the brilliant part. Lustig would be completely honest about one thing. He would tell buyers that the machine worked very slowly. It could only produce one duplicate bill every 6 hours. So if they wanted to make serious money, they'd need to be patient. This selective honesty served two purposes. First, it made the whole story more believable. A machine that worked too quickly would seem suspicious. Second, it gave Lustig time to escape. By the time the buyer realized the machine was fake, that those first few bills had been real bills Lustig had preloaded into the machine, Lustig was long gone. This story perfectly illustrates Law 12. Lustig's con worked because he used strategic honesty. The first bills really were genuine. The machine really did produce them, though not the way buyers thought. And his admission that the process was slow made him seem honest and credible. Why would a con artist tell you that his machine worked slowly? Surely a con artist would claim it worked instantly to create urgency and prevent scrutiny. So Lustig must be legitimate. This is the logic that trapped people. The strategic honesty, the apparent generosity of being forthcoming about limitations, these things disarmed skepticism and made the larger deception possible. Now let's talk about how this operates in the corporate world, because companies use Law 12 constantly and most people never notice. Think about how tech companies operate. They give you free products. Gmail is free. Facebook is free. YouTube is free. Search engines are free. And people think how generous these companies are, providing these incredible services at no cost. But of course nothing is actually free. You're paying with your data, with your attention, with your privacy. The generous free service disarms your skepticism and gets you to invest deeply in their ecosystem. Once you're locked in, once all your emails are in Gmail, once all your photos are on Google Photos, once your entire social life is on Facebook, you're trapped. The cost of leaving is too high. The free service was the Trojan horse that got you inside the walls. Or think about how companies use strategic honesty in their marketing. A company will openly admit to one flaw in their product while hiding 10 others. A food company will proudly declare no high-fructose corn syrup on the package, being completely honest about that one ingredient. But they don't mention the other sweeteners and chemical additives that are just as harmful. The strategic honesty about one ingredient creates a halo effect, making you think the entire product is healthy. Your defenses are lowered. You trust the brand. You buy the product. Law 12 has worked perfectly. Let's examine the political sphere, because this is where Law 12 operates most cynically and with the greatest consequences. Politicians constantly use strategic acts of generosity and honesty to build trust that they then exploit. A politician will champion one genuinely good cause, will fight for one group of vulnerable people, will take one principled stand. And voters think, here's someone who really cares, someone who's different from all the other corrupt politicians. That one genuine act creates trust and loyalty. But while voters are focused on that one good thing, the politician is making deals, accepting donations from special interests, voting for legislation that harms the very people they claim to champion. The selective generosity toward one cause creates cover for betrayal on dozens of others. Or think about how governments use Law 12 on a massive scale. After a period of surveillance and control, a government will grant some small freedom, some minor reform. They'll release some political prisoners. They'll ease some restrictions. And people think, see, things are getting better. The government is listening. We were too critical. But this strategic generosity serves a purpose. It releases social pressure. It makes people less likely to resist. It creates the appearance of reform while the fundamental structures of control remain unchanged or even strengthen. The small freedom granted makes people less likely to notice the larger freedoms being taken away. Now we need to talk about the ethics of using Law 12 yourself, because this is deeply complicated. Is it ever acceptable to use strategic honesty and generosity to manipulate others? The pure moralist would say no, absolutely never. Any form of deception is wrong. Any strategic use of kindness pollutes the kindness itself. But the realist recognizes that we all use Law 12, often without realizing it. When you compliment someone because you want them to be receptive to a request you're about to make, you're using Law 12. When you admit to a small mistake to build credibility before making a larger claim, you're using Law 12. When you give a gift partly because you want something in return, you're using Law 12. These behaviors are so common, so socially accepted, that we don't even think of them as manipulation. But they are. So the question is not whether you'll ever use Law 12. The question is how consciously you'll use it, and to what ends. There's a spectrum. On one end, there's the con artist who uses strategic honesty purely to exploit others, to take their money, to harm them for personal gain. On the other end, there's the person who uses strategic honesty and generosity to build genuine relationships, to create win-win situations, to help others while also helping themselves. The tactics may look similar on the surface, but the intentions and outcomes are completely different. Let me give you an example of ethical use of Law 12. Imagine you're trying to implement a new system at your company. You know the system will face resistance because people fear change. You could force the system on people through authority. Or you could use Law 12 strategically. You start by being completely honest about the system's limitations and the challenges of transition. This honesty builds trust. Then you implement the system first in a small test group and you're generous with support, training, and resources for that group. The test group succeeds and becomes advocates. This generosity has disarmed resistance. Now when you roll out the system more broadly, people are receptive rather than defensive. You've used strategic honesty and generosity, yes. But you've used them to help people overcome their natural resistance to something that will ultimately benefit everyone. The manipulation, if we call it that, was in service of a good outcome. Compare this to unethical use of Law 12. A CEO uses generous public gestures, donating to charity, speaking about company values, being honest about small business challenges, to build a reputation as a caring leader. But privately, that same CEO is exploiting workers, cooking the books, and preparing to cash out before the company collapses. The strategic generosity and honesty are purely a facade to enable exploitation. This is Law 12 used for evil. The difference is in alignment. Are your strategic actions aligned with genuine value creation? Are you using these tactics to help create outcomes that benefit everyone? Or are you using them purely to extract value for yourself at others' expense? This is the ethical line. And it's a line that requires constant self-examination, because it's frighteningly easy to deceive yourself, to convince yourself that your manipulation is actually for others' benefit when really you're just serving yourself. Now let's talk about how to defend yourself against Law 12, because understanding the law is only half the battle. You also need to develop defenses against those who use it against you. The first defense is awareness. When someone is suddenly generous or honest, especially after a period of being neither, ask yourself why. What do they want? What defenses are they trying to lower? This doesn't mean being paranoid or cynical about all generosity. It means being thoughtful and strategic in your trust. The second defense is to separate actions from words and from momentary gestures. Don't judge someone based on one generous act or one moment of apparent honesty. Judge them based on patterns over time. The con artist can be generous for a day. The manipulative partner can be loving for a weekend. The corrupt politician can champion one good cause. But sustained integrity shows itself in consistent behavior over months and years. One swallow doesn't make a summer, as the old saying goes. One generous gesture doesn't make someone trustworthy. The third defense is to maintain healthy skepticism even in the presence of generosity. When someone gives you something, when someone is honest about a flaw, when someone does you a favor, you can appreciate it without letting it lower your defenses completely. You can say thank you while still maintaining your independent judgment. You can recognize the gift without feeling obligated to reciprocate disproportionately. This is emotionally difficult because it feels ungrateful, because it goes against our reciprocity instincts. But it's essential for protecting yourself in a world where Law 12 is constantly being deployed against you. The fourth defense is to look for what's not being said and what's not being given. When someone is honest about one thing, what are they not mentioning? When someone is generous in one area, what are they withholding in another? The magician shows you one hand while the other hand does the trick. Strategic honesty and generosity often work the same way. They focus your attention on one thing to hide something else. Train yourself to look for the hidden hand, to ask what's happening outside the spotlight of apparent generosity. Let me tell you about a fascinating psychological experiment that demonstrates how powerful Law 12 really is. Researchers wanted to see if they could get people to comply with a large, unreasonable request. They tried two approaches. In the first approach, they simply asked people for the large favor. Most people refused. In the second approach, they first asked for an enormous favor that they knew would be refused. When people said no to the enormous request, the researchers acted disappointed but understanding, then made a much smaller request, the one they actually wanted all along. And people said yes at much higher rates. Why? Because the researchers had appeared generous and reasonable by reducing their request. They had been honest about backing down from the extreme demand. This apparent generosity triggered reciprocity. People felt they should be generous in return by agreeing to the smaller request. This technique is called door in the face and it's Law 12 in action. The reverse technique, called foot in the door, also uses Law 12. First you ask for something small and easy. People agree because the request is trivial. You're grateful and generous with your thanks. Then later you ask for something much larger. And people are more likely to agree because they've already said yes once, because you were so appreciative before, because refusing now would create cognitive dissonance with their previous agreement. Both techniques exploit the same principle. Strategic use of apparent reasonableness and generosity to manipulate compliance. And both techniques work frighteningly well. Now let's address a disturbing question. If Law 12 is so effective, if strategic honesty and generosity are such powerful tools of manipulation, does this mean that genuine honesty and generosity are foolish? Does this mean that kindness makes you a sucker? This is the dark conclusion that many people reach when they first understand Law 12. They become cynical. They decide that everyone is manipulating everyone. They stop being generous themselves because they see generosity only as a tool of manipulation. But this is a tragic error. Genuine generosity and honesty are not weaknesses. They're essential for human civilization. They're what made cooperation possible. They're what create trust and connection in community. The problem is not generosity itself. The problem is inability to distinguish between genuine generosity and strategic manipulation. The solution is not to abandon kindness. The solution is to become more discerning. Think about it this way. A knife can be used to prepare food or to harm someone. The existence of knives as weapons doesn't mean we should stop using knives for cooking. It means we should be aware that knives can be dangerous and take appropriate precautions. Similarly, the fact that honesty and generosity can be used manipulatively doesn't mean we should abandon honesty and generosity. It means we should be aware of manipulation and develop appropriate discernment. The wise person gives generously but not foolishly. The wise person is honest but not naive. The wise person trusts but verifies. The wise person remains open-hearted but not empty-headed. This is the balance. This is the middle way between cynicism and gullibility. Both extremes are errors. The cynic sees all generosity as manipulation and becomes isolated and bitter. The naive person sees all manipulation as generosity and becomes a victim. The wise person sees clearly, distinguishes between genuine and strategic kindness, and responds appropriately to each. Let me tell you about the concept of enlightened self-interest developed by Alexis de Tocqueville when he studied American democracy. Tocqueville observed that Americans were generous and helpful to each other, not purely out of altruism, but because they understood that a society of mutual aid benefited everyone including themselves. They helped their neighbors build a barn because they knew their neighbors would help them in return. This was strategic generosity, yes, but it was strategic generosity in service of genuine community benefit. Everyone knew the game and everyone benefited. This is Law 12 operating in a transparent, ethical, mutually beneficial way. Contrast this with the con artist's version of Law 12, where only the manipulator knows the game and only the manipulator benefits. The difference is transparency and mutual benefit. When generosity and honesty are used strategically but openly, in a context where everyone understands and benefits, it's not manipulation. It's intelligent social coordination. When they're used deceptively, where one person knows the game and others don't, where one person benefits at others' expense, it becomes exploitation. So how should you use Law 12 in your own life? First, recognize that you probably already use it unconsciously. Become conscious of when and how you're being strategically honest or generous. Second, examine your intentions. Are you using these tactics to create win-win situations or to exploit others? Third, consider the long term. Strategic manipulation might work in the short term, but it destroys trust in relationships over time. Is the temporary advantage worth the long-term cost? Fourth, aim for transparency when possible. If you can be strategically honest and generous in ways that create mutual benefit, where others understand and benefit from the dynamic, that's far better than deceptive manipulation. Fifth, develop your ability to recognize when others are using Law 12 against you, so you can protect yourself without becoming cynical. Let's talk about one of the most sophisticated applications of Law 12 in the modern world. Branding and corporate image. Companies spend billions of dollars to appear honest, generous, and trustworthy. They create elaborate corporate social responsibility programs. They make public commitments to environmental sustainability, to social justice, to ethical business practices. They're extremely transparent about certain aspects of their operations. They run generous philanthropic initiatives. And consumers think, here's a company I can trust, a company that cares about more than profit. But look closer. That transparency about environmental impact? It's selective. They're honest about their recycling program while being silent about their carbon emissions. That generous donation to charity? It's a tiny fraction of their profits and comes with massive tax benefits. That commitment to ethical practices? It applies to their operations in developed countries with strong regulations, but not to their factories in countries where labor is cheap and laws are weak. The strategic honesty and generosity create a halo effect that prevents scrutiny of larger issues. This is Law 12 operating at the highest corporate level. And it works brilliantly. Studies show that consumers will pay more for products from companies they perceive as ethical and generous, even when the actual differences in ethical behavior are minimal or non-existent. The perception of generosity and honesty, carefully cultivated through strategic communications, becomes more powerful than reality. Companies don't need to be genuinely ethical. They need to appear ethical in strategically visible ways. This is cynical, yes. But it's also the reality of how modern markets and modern power operate. Now we're approaching the deepest level of Law 12, the level that most people never reach in their understanding. The ultimate use of strategic honesty is not to deceive others about who you are, but to reveal who you are selectively in ways that create specific perceptions. Let me explain. The most sophisticated manipulators don't pretend to be something they're not. They reveal genuine aspects of themselves, but they control which aspects are visible and when. This is far more powerful than simple lying because it's largely true. It's just selectively true. Think about a politician who genuinely does care about certain issues, who genuinely does have some good qualities, who genuinely has accomplished some positive things. That politician doesn't need to lie. They just need to ensure that voters see the positive aspects prominently while the negative aspects remain in shadow. The honesty about the positive things makes the selective silence about negative things less noticeable. This is Law 12 at its most subtle. It's not lying. It's strategic truth-telling. It's honest but not complete. And incompleteness is a form of deception. We all do this to some degree. You present different aspects of yourself in different contexts. You're one person at work, another at home, another with friends. You emphasize certain qualities in a job interview and de-emphasize others. You're honest about your strengths and quiet about your weaknesses. This is normal and necessary social behavior. But taken to an extreme, weaponized and used strategically for manipulation rather than just social lubrication, it becomes Law 12 in its purest form. Let me give you a final historical example that shows both the power and the ultimate danger of Law 12. In ancient Rome, there was an emperor named Tiberius who understood strategic generosity perfectly. Early in his reign, Tiberius was extremely generous. He reduced taxes, he funded public works, he appeared in public regularly, he listened to senators, he seemed to embody the virtues of the old Roman Republic. People loved him. His generosity disarmed opposition. He built tremendous political capital. Then, slowly, he began to tighten his grip. He used informants. He punished dissent. He became paranoid and cruel. By the time people realized what was happening, Tiberius was too powerful to oppose. His early generosity had given him the power to later become tyrannical. And the tragedy was that his early generosity had been genuine in a sense. He really had reduced taxes. He really had funded public works. But the purpose of that generosity was to accumulate power that he would later use oppressively. The generosity was real but strategic. This is Law 12 at the scale of empire, and it shows both how effective the law can be and how dark its ultimate consequences can become. So we come to the end of this exploration with profound questions. In a world where honesty and generosity can be weapons, where kindness can be manipulation, Where trust can be a trap, how do we live? Do we become cynics who trust no one and give nothing? Do we become manipulators who use kindness strategically to exploit others? Or is there another way? I believe there is. The path forward is to be simultaneously generous and discerning. To be honest but not foolish. To trust but not blindly. To give freely but not to those who would exploit that generosity. To recognize manipulation without becoming manipulative. To understand Law 12 without being corrupted by it. This requires wisdom. It requires constant awareness. It requires examining your own motivations and the motivations of others. It requires holding the tension between openness and protection, between kindness and boundaries. The ultimate lesson of Law 12 is not that you should use honesty and generosity as weapons. The ultimate lesson is that you should understand that others will use them as weapons against you, and that you need to develop the discernment to tell the difference between genuine kindness and strategic manipulation. You need to become sophisticated enough to recognize the Trojan horse before you pull it inside your walls. You need to understand that sometimes the most dangerous gift is the one that seems most generous. What will you do with this knowledge? Will you use it to become more manipulative, more strategic in exploiting others? Or will you use it to become more discerning, more protected against manipulation, more wise in your trust? Will you become the person who uses Law 12 to exploit, or the person who understands Law 12 well enough to defend against exploitation while remaining genuinely generous and honest? The choice, as always, is yours. But now you understand the game. Now you can see the Trojan horse for what it is. Now you can distinguish between generosity that serves and generosity that manipulates. And that knowledge, used wisely, is the ultimate protection against being disarmed by those who would use your own good nature against you.